Today I have with me Oli from Luware and our very own head of tech, Mike Gilroy-Scott. The topic of the yeah, thank you for both joining. The topic of the webinar today is advanced calling in Teams. Now, we've run a number of webinars around Teams Voice for various stages of adoption, and most businesses are looking to consolidate the number of vendors they have. Voicing to Teams is a natural place to do that, given that most other forms of communications are carried out in this application. Today, in terms of people joining the webinar, we have some who have already made that journey into Teams and are looking to enhance that experience. We have others who haven't made that leap, either due to project timeframes, other things going on, or perhaps perceived limitations of what Teams can deliver. For both these use cases, hopefully the areas we touched on today will be of interest. And really, I guess the key to any successful technology deployment should be measured on user experience. The key to Teams generally is to provide that single user interface, a single experience for all communications, video, IM, and voice. And for those that have looked into this and know a bit about it, whether you're in the journey of looking at it or already in Teams Voice, Microsoft isn't trying to solve all of the issues for all people. What they've done instead is they focused on allowing specialist businesses to integrate into their platform to provide a single user interface, integrating really deeply into the APIs that enhances the experience, continues the single application experience. And Luware is one of those partners, which is what we're having here today. We work closely with Luware and a number of clients and other different problems and things that we've tried to solve for customers, or just used generally to enhance our platform and our offering. And the flow of today's webinar seemed to make sense that we should probably follow the flow of a call about how it hits into the first part of a business. And Mike will be talking about what we can do natively in Teams. Oli will be talking about what we can do to enhance that experience. And no answer is the same for any business. So it's really about getting the right solution for a company. At the end of the webinar today, we've got a little poll, and in that poll we've got 4 dates that we set for little 15-minute demos of the technology. Now, if you're interested in the subject matter but the time doesn't work, that's absolutely fine. Let us know. And of course, do ask any questions during the webinar and we'll answer those with the people that are on the call. So getting to the webinar. So look, we talked about following the flow of a call, and we find a lot of businesses now rely on IVRs to handle this first interaction. So firstly, talk about native Teams, Mike. What are the options, Teams account functionality and setup that we would look at natively for clients?
Yeah, so I think one of the most commonly asked things that Teams can do when people are looking at Teams Voices are like, does it do IVR or auto attendant, and does it have call queues? And I think the short answer to that question is absolutely yes. They're kind of bread and butter telephony features that everyone's kind of got used to. And it's not just basic single tier IVR stuff. You can do multi-tier IVRs, you can do text to speech, you can do time of day routing, you can do holiday based routing, so some quite advanced features, which all sounds great. And if you were reading the spec sheet, you might go, well, that's fine, that's everything I need to do. There are nuances, I suppose is the better way of describing it, to sort of explain, well, the reality of that setup is one thing, living with it is maybe another thing, because the setup, whilst GUI based, so it's done through the Teams Admin Center web interface. First challenge, who's got access to your Teams Admin Center to make those changes? And I suppose it's the way that Microsoft builds out those IVRs. It's not in a nice graphical flow chart or drag and drop features. You're creating resources within the tenant to join together to make things happen, which isn't necessarily logically easy to follow. So when it comes to someone managing it, you're going to have to have some pretty good documentation so that everyone knows what it is, or someone who really understands the technology behind it to manage it. And I suppose at this point, I think we maybe swing across to Oli, just explain how things are different if you add some of the Nimbus product into the equation.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think that's a really good point. What we found is that customers that have come from just using Teams natively, often they've wanted to actually delegate some of those call flows or some of those designs to, say, a customer service manager or a help desk manager. And it's at that point where you can come unstuck with permissions, etc. So by removing that from the Teams Admin Center and bringing that into an alternative platform, we can actually build that to be much more of a graphic graphical drag and drop type interface. So you can easily see, okay, we're going to route by time of day first, then go to an auto attendant, then check the availability. And it's when you start getting into those flows that the requirements come out where you think, okay, well, if this team aren't available, then what do we want to happen to the call? We probably don't want that caller just sitting in a queue where there's no agents available. So what we can do is use the team's presence to our advantage to actually say, okay, if Mike and Mark aren't available, let's route that call off to the overflow queue or to our sales queue instead. So we can take kind of native features in Teams like the presence and actually use that to our advantage with some intelligent routing options there.
Yeah, that's great. And in fact, looking at the flow of a call, that really covers quite high level the IVR functionality, because in fact user control is another piece of the IVR. I think Mike mentioned it a moment ago that natively in Teams it is very much a technical IT function, whereas actually there may be use cases where you want Teams to have a bit more control over that.
Yeah, exactly. Often things like announcements, or let's say, for example, your team has a training day. At that point, you don't want to go and tell your IT team to go and change the call queues there, because that involves quite a lot of people. You'd rather just select a backup kind of workflow, save that, and off you go. I think when we start to think about some other scenarios as well, often a call queue where it's just round robin or simultaneous ring isn't really a good enough routing option there. Often you'll have different priority levels that you want to assign to call queues. So let's say, for example, that you're running a 24/7 support desk and one of your best customers rings in, or one of your highest value customers rings in, you probably want to do something to actually prioritize that call and get that to the top of the queue. And that's things that we can look at with Luware as well. We can prioritize those queues and prioritize those callers to make sure that that call is answered as quickly and efficiently as possible.
So once it's left the IVR, chances are it's going to perhaps hit a receptionist, an attendant, or maybe a sort of more dedicated team. So going back to the Teams functionality, Mike, Teams natively, how does it work? What do people use? What benefits? How do you cover that?
So most people will be answering calls on the sort of PC-based application, which is essentially, a soft phone application. So you don't actually need a physical phone anymore. And traditionally, maybe going back 15, 20 years, it might be a big handset on the desk with loads of buttons with a load of lights on it. So it doesn't quite look like that anymore. And I think most people are familiar with what the Teams interface looks like. And for those who don't, when you receive a voice call as opposed to a Teams call, it looks very similar to how it would look if you were just in a meeting like this. So you would have all your controls at the top. You were able to sort of put the call on hold. You'll be able to park the call. You can transfer the call. You can bring people into the call, much like you would if you're on a video call and you wanted to bring in a colleague. It's the same process for that, whether it be a telephone number, or whether it be just a colleague internally. So you've got all of those features. You can transfer call to voicemail. It's pretty fully featured. And again, back to that kind of spec sheet, it's checking off all of the feature sets. But I think where you sort of slip up a little bit is the ability to see who else is in the queue, how long that person has been in the queue. For example, they might have been waiting 2 or 3 minutes before you got to the call. It might have only just been presented to you. You don't have any of that kind of visibility. Yes, you get presence because it's Teams. Of course, you can see if your colleagues are available in a meeting, do not disturb, all of those things you've got available to you. But you have to search for their name first before you can do it. There's no kind of department search to go, right, I need someone in the sales team to answer this call, unless you've got, another window with that kind of availability information on there. You're a little bit blind as to what's going on. So if you are handling multiple calls, it's a dedicated reception or a sort of global reception for a sort of organization. You need visibility and the ability to handle huge volumes of calls. It's going to really struggle in those situations. So I suppose, again, over to Oli, what's the solution to these kind of problems?
Yeah, so you mentioned it, Mike. Traditionally, with legacy PBXs, you might have a attendant or a console in front of you, or you might have a phone with a sidecar. So what we tried to do at Luware is basically replicate that inside of Teams to perform a number of different functions, but essentially make it easier for operators to handle those calls. The first thing would be, and this would be an answer to Jacqueline's question there, is actually having full management of the queues that you're answering calls in. So if I was a receptionist and I'm answering calls for 4 different locations, I can log in and out of those different locations, but also as those calls are coming through, see which queue they've called in. So I know this is a call for the London office or the Nottingham office. So that's kind of step one. Once we have the active call, we've created a much more kind of comprehensive search mechanism. So I can search for all of my Active Directory users, so all of my Teams users, but I can then also filter my search by things like department. So if I just wanted to find somebody that's available in our team, in our sales department, I can just filter the search by our sales department and then have everybody in that sales department in front of me, where then I can see their presence. So you mentioned it, Mike, in the Teams native window to search to actually see if somebody's available, it's really quite difficult. You have to search for them, and then even then you can't really see their presence. So we've made that very central. So I can see if somebody wants to speak to Mike, I can see he's on Do Not Disturb because he's in a webinar, or I can see he's available. Once we've got the presence and we can see if that person's available, we obviously want to have different transfer options. So a blind transfer might not work for everybody. We might actually want to speak to Mike first to see if he wants to take that call or explain to him what that call is calling in about. So having that consultative transfer or a safe transfer where if Mike doesn't answer when I try the transfer, that call comes back to me might be more appropriate if it's a really important caller. So we want to provide those options in an intuitive interface so the operator can choose based on the call what the most appropriate transfer option is. And then lastly, we've integrated this with other aspects of O365. So if I need to check Mike's availability, I can have a look in his calendar right from the attendant console. I don't have to go back to Outlook to look at his calendar, or I can send him a quick message in Teams, which will already have a template telling Mike that person's number to call them back.
It's also worth possibly mentioning contacts, isn't it? So when someone dials in, you know, now we've written a little separate app for contacts in the sort of native Teams app. We've got someone calling in, you know, you might want to know who's calling. You might want to have a regular enough person that you're calling that isn't inside the organization. Do you want to perhaps touch on that, Oli, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So within Luware, we can build external address books. Essentially, these are contact directories that are apart from Active Directory. So let's say, for example, as a receptionist, I often have to dial a taxi, or I have to ring up the pizza delivery company, or whatever it is. I can import those via Excel or Outlook as an external directory. And then if I need to transfer calls to those, I can do, or if those callers are calling into me, I'll be able to recognize those contacts as well.
Fantastic. Well, look, following the flow of the call, the receptionist or the sales team have either received or passed that call on. A big requirement for a lot of businesses, that quite a lot of businesses with legacy infrastructure are quite used to CRM integration. You know, whether it's popping, whether it's adding notes. You know, there are some native integrations with Teams and Dynamics, being Microsoft. But Mike, do you want to perhaps touch on that before we go into a sort of more deeper advanced conversation around how we can perhaps improve it at Luware?
Yeah, so just to touch on that, obviously when you receive a call, it's one thing to sort of see the number, but sometimes it's very important to see who the person is, you know, and kind of that lookup. And going beyond that, you know, it might be I needed my Salesforce record up when that happens because I might need some information about that caller to provide better customer service. Now, natively with Microsoft, it supports URL popping. So what that means is you specify the URL you want to pop, whether it be Salesforce or any other web-based kind of CRM system, and then a query essentially at the end of the call, which will it's as simple as the incoming number, really. So as long as your CRM supports that kind of search, then what can happen is the web page will open, it will go to that contact record if it exists. There is no feedback loop on this though, so it's not like there's no result, pop up a new one. So it would depend on the CRM you're using, but that after that, that's literally all you get. Just quickly, obviously, because Microsoft obviously has the Dynamics platform, there's a bit more advanced integrations in that, but not everyone has Dynamics. So, and that's probably a topic for another discussion rather than going into that today. But I suppose now might be a good time to say, well, what else can you do with that incoming number? What are the options? We can go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think at Luware, we want to take that a step further. So we would call this more of a context-based screen pop. So yes, we can pop a screen pop as a call comes in. So if Mike calls in and I'm using Salesforce, I can pop his Salesforce record, okay? But we can also then take that in other directions. So let's say, for example, Mike calls in and we don't recognize Mike in our CRM system, we can pop a blank contact record with his phone number already inserted into that blank record. So the agent's prompted to complete that record and save it. Or if we know, for example, that he's got an existing ticket open with us, we can spot that with a parameter, and then we can pop a list of his open tickets. So we can really go a step further there and design different call pops based on that incoming caller and the information we know about them. And then if we take that on to some other areas, obviously, when you receive those calls from Mike and he's in our CRM system, we're likely going to want to record that or create a log of that call. So every time that Mike calls in, we can create a simple task or a call log in your CRM or ERP system. So that means as soon as the agent sees that record, they can see, okay, he's called in 3 times in the last week. Let's say Mike calls in and we don't get that call answered. It maybe goes to voicemail or he requests a call back. We can then take that outcome from the call and then create a task in the CRM. So if Mike calls in and he abandons his call, we could create a task to call that person back in the CRM system. And then if we turn this back around and think about the routing again, we can use your CRM system or a database system or an ERP system to actually enhance the call routing. So if we take a couple of use cases, let's say you have some VIPs logged in your CRM. So Mike's a VIP. We recognize that as he calls in. We can then, with our routing platform, say, okay, Mike's a VIP. We recognize that. Without him having to enter any information, we then route him to our high priority queue. Or he's calling in to get an update on an order. We then ask Mike to type in his order number. He types that in via DTMF, and then we could actually play back some parameters from the CRM. So we could say to Mike, okay, we could see from the CRM your order is in the delivery status and the due date is next Tuesday. So without having to speak to an agent, he's interacted with us and he's got the information he needs from our CRM system via the phone system.
Because actually, it's interesting you talk about integration CRMs. So there's the sort of, you mentioned Salesforce. Obviously, a lot of people use Salesforce. Dynamics clearly is very well adopted. Now, what's quite interesting with the way in which the platform's built on the Microsoft API and being, again, so ubiquitous, how that plays with either sort of more bespoke CRMs or other APIs that are out there. Do you want to perhaps touch on that? Because we have had a couple of clients that we've gone into where we've integrated quite nicely, where it hasn't been a sort of clear off-the-shelf kind of proposition.
Yeah, so what we're using in the background to actually create these integrations is Power Automate. The reason we've done that is kind of twofold. One, it keeps that data in your tenant, so you don't have to worry about that data going off to a third party because it's a Microsoft connector. Obviously, there are hundreds of certified out-of-the-box connectors, but as Mark mentioned, if you've built something a bit more bespoke or you're using something that doesn't have a connector, we can use a REST API with our standard connector. So we can still build out a lot of those use cases I spoke about there, still using Power Automate, but also harnessing a REST API from that external CRM or ERP system.
Yeah, it's a much deeper conversation than perhaps we can cover today, but that was well answered. Thanks, Oli. You mentioned obviously call logging for the purposes of CRM. Now, businesses also, this is really the fourth topic of what we're looking to cover today, is historical. So a lot of what we talked about, the flow of the call right now, it's come into the IVR, it's hit the auto attendant, gone to the reception console, maybe CRM. Now, business likes to understand what's been going on historically in the organization as much as what's going on in real time. So again, I guess going back to the Teams piece, Mike, now we do work with other platforms outside of Luware for some of the more generic call logging type functionality, but in the context of what we're here to talk about today, do you want to perhaps touch upon that?
Yeah, so Microsoft does provide some data and some tools for you to look at, your historical call information, mainly through the Teams Admin Center. But if you're a dab hand at the Graph API, you can maybe pull off those queries. But what you're ending up with is a big CSV file of data, which you then have to try and make sense of. And if you have a complex call scenario where a call comes in, it goes to an IVR, goes to a particular call queue, and then it goes to user A, who then transfers it to user B, who then conferences in user C, that presents a bit of a challenge to see what happened with that sort of call flow. So, you know, it's a challenge, and we offer a software package which helps make sense of that. And in terms of reporting, there are some Power BI templates which Microsoft provide, what I would describe as is, so no support for them, which can give you some information and some graphical sort of reporting as to what's going on with your IVRs and call queues, but I would always describe it as quite limited, and it's only historic. There's no kind of real-time visibility. So if you're interested in live information about your call queues, how many agents have you got available, how many, so I'm stealing Oli's thunder here, but you know, that visibility of what's going on the platform, and maybe Oli will expand on that and how it can be solved.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably one of the primary requirements that our customers come to us with is, okay, how can we see what's going on in real time? So there are two kind of sides to that. You've obviously got the agent side. So you obviously want to be able to understand how many people have we actually got available. And that's not just people that are logged into a queue, because if you're logged into a queue and you're on a Teams call or you're hosting a Teams meeting, that means you can't actually receive another call. So we will tell you how many people are logged into a queue and actually available to take that call in Teams. And then the other side of it is seeing the information about the real-time queue. So how many users, how many callers are waiting in the queue, how many are in the IVR, how many calls do we have connected? And once we know those two kind of key bits of information, we can then start to manage the load in real time. So if we see, okay, our customer service team has 5 callers waiting and no users available, as a supervisor, we can provide a dashboard for that supervisor to say, okay, Mark needs to be logged in now, Mike needs to be logged in now, and now we suddenly have 2 people available and they can handle those calls. So once you know that live information, you can actually manage that in real time. The other kind of portion of this is seeing the KPIs or SLAs that are generated by the queues. So we provide dashboards, but also Power BI templates where you can add filters and slicers to see, okay, how is this queue performing, the acceptance rates, the consultation rates, the connected times, but also see user performance metrics. So which user is accepting calls or declining calls, or actually, probably more importantly, ignoring calls.
Yeah, and in fact, just on a piece of terminology, that was you mentioned agents a number of times there. Now there is a whole nother contact center conversation, whole platform, and probably a whole nother webinar on that. So when you mention agent, you are really referring to user in that context. So it's just a technology is allowing the user to be part of a wider group. Do you want to perhaps expand on that a little bit, Oli?
Yeah, definitely. I think with some of the modules that we offer at Luware, we're really trying to fit that gap between what some would consider a full-blown contact center and Teams natively. What a lot of organizations have is some of these advanced call routing or reporting kind of requirements, but they're certainly not contact center agents. They're certainly not working at call centers. So actually, yeah, we really just mean normal users who are just handling calls as part of their other daily activities.
Yeah, because interestingly, this really goes back to the sort of task at hand here. You know, going back a few years now, and you know, we can still probably just about talk about the pandemic. This is where a lot of the reasons for this adoption started, in the fact that there's remote users and everyone's collaborating in where they are. It's, you know, in that time, a lot of people were just using mobiles, and they lost all that ability to route to groups. And now people are coming back and saying, you know, we do need a voice functionality in the organization, because yeah, it might just be a part of the wider collaboration. But actually, once you start looking into this and say, well, I need to be able to provide more than just a single point of contact, I need to be able to provide a group of people in a certain function. What are you seeing in the market generally, Oli, that's driving those requirements for you just now?
Yeah, I think it's the reporting piece, definitely, especially with a kind of a remote workforce, having that visibility wherever people are working. I think it's also the call handling piece that we spoke about earlier, and if you're handling multiple calls, then often the standard Teams interface isn't the most intuitive way of doing it. I think in terms of kind of what's next, or some other things to think about for organizations, we pretty much purely focus on voice here, but Teams obviously is a video and a chat platform. Now, for internal collaboration, I'm sure everyone here is using Teams for video and chats, but for external collaboration or communication with your customers, what we're doing is we're allowing customers to have a chat function on their website and bring those chats into the Teams native chat, or allowing a video contact page on a customer's website and then bringing those video meetings as Teams meetings into Teams. So for the user, they continue to use Teams for chat and for video and voice, but it also opens up other contact avenues or other contact channels for an organization via the website. So I'd say that's kind of what's next, or another thing to think about.
I think that's quite exciting, because you're taking that kind of concept of a voice platform and blending it with the native Teams and Azure Communication Services functions for web chat and video as well. So I think that's really exciting, and the fact you have a single application to do that, and it's part of your internal collaboration tool as well. I think that's very exciting.
Because there was a stat we were looking at, and I may misquote this, but it's a large percentage. We'll call it 80%. We'll validate it. It's a Gartner stat. That in terms of one of the sort of main things IT teams are looking at the moment is consolidating vendors. Now, starting with voice bringing to Teams, that's a tick. You're going from a siloed PBX to a single application. Then you're bringing in web chat, you're bringing in perhaps another video platform, you're starting to reduce it down further. And, a lot of customers we talk to as well aren't just talking about what the user has, it's about what the IT team has. And when they start to have to not manage all these different applications and platforms, it brings great efficiency. And again, that percentage we'll validate, but there's a large number of companies I'm
Everyone
talking
loves
to.
a good stat, Mark.
Exactly. Don't let it get away with a good story, but
Yeah.
It's certainly what a lot of businesses I'm talking to just now are sort of talking about.
Yeah. That concept of application sprawl, it's different. The more applications you have, the harder it is to manage. I mean, there's an argument for getting best of breed in every kind of circumstance, but then you just end up with this huge platform and things that don't necessarily talk to each other, and you lose an element of efficiency. So you might not get all of the best features just with the single application, but if you can you can cover 90% of what you actually really use and need, then it brings a whole other benefits, in terms of supportability and management.
Fantastic. Look, we're coming up to the end of the webinar now, so if anyone has any questions, please do fire them into the chat. We also have a photos question here. Do we have traditional desk phones or traditional in locations? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we Mike, perhaps you want to cover this around are these analog, are they IP? Perhaps you can cover both examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are sort of the normal way to do it would be to buy a Teams native handset. This is sometimes the challenge with people, because they might have made an investment of moving to 8x8 or Ring Central just at the start of the pandemic, having to bought a huge load of Poly handsets. Some of those handsets from Poly can be moved across to what Microsoft provides as the SIP gateway, which essentially converts it into a handset that can connect to Teams just using SIP. But it doesn't get any of the nice features like the visual voicemail and the transcriptions and all the other contacts and presence and information you get on a native Teams phone. If you've got a load of analog phones, let's say some traditional meeting room conference phones, then yes, we can support those as well using on-site gateways or ATA's devices connecting into the SIP gateway. So there are plenty of handset options for every shape and size and budget.
Fantastic. We've got another couple of questions here as well, actually, but just before everyone gets to the end of the webinar here, let's bring up the poll, because this is really just to sort of let us know your interest in seeing some of this technology. We've set these little 15-minute sort of sessions up with Oli to run through, so we can basically run through the detail and technology of what we're talking about. So if the content is of interest, the time or the date doesn't work, let us know that. Yeah, very happy to. Well, it'd be great to have you along to show you some of these things in action that we talked about. But yeah, to answer a couple of questions here. Question for let's put this one to Oli. This is probably one for you. Do you think Teams will have a contact center function in the future requiring integration with a third party? Without requiring integration. And I guess it's the concept of what third party means, because it's not third party in the truest sense, is in the way it's working just now. But perhaps Oli, that's one for you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Obviously, one that I'm very interested in, because it concerns my livelihood. So I think if I had a crystal ball, then yeah, I'd probably be doing something else. But I think so far Microsoft have developed this Graph API, which is essentially an API which allows vendors like us to develop solutions using Teams. So that's the route they've gone down so far. They've kind of left it open for specialist vendors like us to build on top of Teams. So that would kind of say to me that this is part of the plan for Microsoft, for companies like Luware to build those solutions. But obviously, in the future, Microsoft might see a need to acquire a company or develop something themselves. Yeah, Microsoft are an absolute beast with unlimited resources. So yeah, we'll see.
There's a question here actually, which again is probably one for you, Mike, about can we run Teams alongside a on-premise PBX? Oh, you've answered the question here.
Yeah, and we in fact we do just that for certain companies. There may be a reason they might have a contact, like a traditional contact center that they have for a specific part of their team that can't move over to Teams just yet, or they're in contract, etc. So what we do is we build out a sort of integration between those two platforms, you know, shared dial plans, etc. So you can have part of your business on Teams, part of your business on your on-prem PBX, and depending on what the scenario is, happy to have a conversation about what the options are. There's lots of different ways of solving that. Yeah.
And in fact, on that point, you know, if you're in contract with another SIP provider, we're pretty agnostic about that as well. So that we host sort of Azure-based gateways for connecting into Teams Voice, and we can you don't need to port your numbers. You know, if you have SIP carriers, you need someone to help with the Teams piece, we can equally do that if that's something that's holding you back from moving just now. So again, if there's consideration there, do let us know. But we've got lots of experience in integrating. You know, we started off moving legacy infrastructure into the cloud. That's the sort of purpose of the organization, and we understand both those worlds pretty well. Any other questions? Because we've otherwise just about reached time. Thank you for your poll responses.
The poll as well. Yeah.
And again, if the times don't work for you, click on the subject matter and let us know, and we can sort of do something separately for you. Another message here from Carl. Yeah. Otherwise, thank you so much for giving up your Tuesday afternoon for us. Very much appreciate you joining. We do host these monthly around various different subject areas, Teams being a kind of key one. We also run security and Fortinet quite recently, so we'll keep you on the list if it's of interest to you, and please do come and join another one in the future. But many thanks for coming along.